The match flared, a violent spark of orange that sliced through the oppressive velvet of the shadow pine forest. From the high vantage of a jagged limestone ridge, Conrad Thorne felt his wolf heave against the cage of his ribs. His pupils dilated, drinking in the sight of Simone Jett huddling over the small, desperate flame. It had been 5 years, but her scent hit him like a physical blow. Vanilla, rain-washed wildflowers, and the sharp, terrifyingly familiar musk of his own lineage. He crouched in the freezing dark, his knuckles grazing the forest floor, as claws threatened to rip through his skin. Every instinct as the Alpha King screamed at him to descend, to snap the neck of whatever dared threaten her, and then to demand why she had left him to rot in the silence of his own kingdom. The firelight flickered, illuminating the hollows of her cheeks and the fierce protective way she pulled 2 small bundles closer to her chest. Conrad's breath hitched. His wolf, usually a creature of cold violence, whimpered. A sound of agonizing recognition. He wasn't just smelling her, he was smelling them. The air carried the scent of milk and new growth, intertwined with a golden power that could only belong to him. "Traitor," he hissed, the word tasting like ash. He watched her feed the fire, breaking the sacred law of his borders. Anyone else would have been shredded for such a transgression, but as a low howl echoed from a distant ridge, the rival pack hunting her, Conrad didn't move to strike. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the encroaching darkness. She had lit a fire to survive the night, unaware she had summoned a monster far more dangerous than the ones she was running from. He would guard her tonight, but when the sun rose, there would be nowhere left for her to hide. The wind shifted, slicing through the ancient boughs of the shadow pine forest, and carrying a ghost Conrad Thorne had spent 5 years trying to exorcise. It hit him with the force of a physical blow. The intoxicating, unmistakable scent of vanilla and rain-washed wildflowers. For a heartbeat, the Alpha King's world stopped. Deep within his chest, the beast he had kept under iron lock and key roared to life, scratching at his ribs with a singular primal command that vibrated through his very marrow. Mate. Conrad gripped the bark of a towering pine, his claws shredding the wood as he fought to anchor himself. His wolf didn't care about time or the agonizing vacuum of the last half-decade. It only knew that the missing piece of its soul was breathing the same forest air. But as the scent grew stronger, the man in Conrad surged back with a bitter, freezing fury. He remembered the morning he had woken up to a cold, empty bed and a silence that had echoed through his halls for years. He remembered the sting of betrayal that had hardened his heart into a fortress of ice. Simone hadn't just left. She had vanished into the night, leaving him to rule a kingdom that felt like a tomb. Now she was here, trespassing on his lands, breaking his laws, and smelling of a life he was no longer a part of. His wolf screamed for a reunion, but his heart, scarred and thorny, demanded a reckoning. As he began to descend through the shadows, silent as a reaper, Conrad vowed that this time he wouldn't be the one left in the cold. She was in his territory now, and the Alpha King was finished waiting. The first grey light of dawn filtered through the canopy, peeling back the protective shroud of the night. Conrad remained motionless in the boughs of an ancient oak, his body stiff from the hours of silent vigil. Below him, the fire had dwindled to glowing embers, but the warmth in the small clearing was about to be replaced by a chilling revelation. Simone stirred first, her hand instinctively tightening around the 2 small bundles beside her. As the light touched the forest floor, the twins began to wake, rubbing the sleep from their faces with small, rounded fists. Conrad leaned forward, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. One of the girls sat up, blinking against the soft morning glare, and then she looked up, directly toward the shadows where he hid. The breath died in Conrad's throat. The girl's eyes weren't the deep brown of Simone's. They were a piercing, iridescent hazel, a swirling blend of forest green and burnt amber. ringed by a distinct charcoal circle. It was a genetic signature so rare it was spoken of only in the Thorne family lineage, a trait that had marked every Alpha King for 7 generations. The second twin yawned, revealing the exact same golden-flecked gaze. The beast within Conrad, which had spent the night howling for blood and vengeance, suddenly went silent. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the absolute heavy paralysis of a predator that had just realized it was looking at its own mirror image. The shock was a physical weight, pinning him to the branch. They weren't just hers. They were his. Every jagged thought of punishment evaporated, replaced by a terrifying, possessive awe. He wasn't just watching his traitorous mate. He was staring at the stolen future of the Thorne throne. The snap of a dry branch was like a gunshot in the silent clearing. Simone bolted upright, her body a frantic shield over Ava and Aria as she scrambled backward, her heels digging into the dirt. From the impenetrable veil of the ancient pines, a figure coalesced, tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating a cold, magnetic power that seemed to drop the temperature of the forest. Conrad stepped into the morning light, his presence so commanding that even the birds fell silent. He looked like a god of old, dressed in high-end tactical gear that couldn't hide the raw, lethal grace of his predatory frame. Simone's face drained of all color, her breath hitching in a jagged sob of pure, unadulterated terror. "Conrad," she whispered, the name sounding like a prayer and a death sentence all at once, but the twins didn't share her fear. While Simone trembled, Ava leaned around her mother's arm, her wide, hazel eyes fixed on the stranger with an eerie, knowing calm. Little Aria followed suit, tilting her head as if hearing a frequency only the 3 of them could understand. "Eyes like mine," Aria chirped, her small voice cutting through the heavy tension. She pointed a tiny finger toward the Alpha King, her innocent curiosity acting as a tether that pulled him closer. Conrad halted 10 feet away, his jaw clamped shut so tight the muscle pulsed in his cheek. He looked at Simone, the woman who had stolen his heart and his heirs, and then at the girls. The air between them crackled with 5 years of unspoken questions and the terrifying weight of his claim. He was the monster she had run from, but as the twins reached out toward him, the standoff became a heart-wrenching battlefield where the only casualty was his resolve. The sky turned a bruised, sickly violet as the first crack of thunder rattled the forest floor. The shadow pine forest was no longer a silent witness. It was becoming a death trap. Icy wind whipped through the clearing, threatening to extinguish what remained of the fire and tearing at the twins' thin coats. Conrad's gaze shifted from the girls to the horizon, his nostrils flaring as he scented the ozone and the heavy incoming deluge. "The ridge will flood within the hour," Conrad stated, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that brooked no argument. Before Simone could protest, he moved. With a grace that defied his massive size, he scooped Ava and Aria into his arms. The girls squealed, not in fear, but in surprise, instinctively clinging to his neck. Simone let out a strangled cry, her hands reaching out for them, but Conrad's eyes locked onto hers, cold and unwavering. "If you want them to live through the night, you will follow me." He led them through a concealed trail, the canopy groaning under the weight of the gale. Just as the heavens opened in a torrential downpour, a structure loomed out of the mist, a fortress of dark stone and glass hidden deep within the timber. This was his private sanctuary, a place where the Alpha King escaped the world. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind them, sealing out the howling storm and trapping them in a space that felt suddenly dangerously small. The air inside was thick with the scent of cedar and his intoxicating musk. As Simone stood shivering in the grand, dim hallway, watching the man she feared most tenderly set her daughters down, the realization hit her. She was no longer a fugitive of the forest. She was a guest in his cage, and there was nowhere left to run. The fire crackled in the hearth of the stone estate, but its warmth couldn't touch the frost settling between them. Conrad stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his silhouette a dark, jagged shadow against the lightning-streaked sky. He didn't look at her, but his voice was a low, dangerous vibration. 5 years, Simone. You stole 5 years of my daughter's lives because you thought I was a monster. Or was I just not worth the truth? Simone clutched a steaming mug of tea, her knuckles white. She looked at Ava and Aria, who had finally drifted into a deep sleep on the velvet sofa, their hazel eyes hidden beneath dark lashes. It wasn't about you, Conrad. It was about what they carry. She stood, her shadow dancing on the walls as she approached him. The elders of my old pack. They saw it before the girls were even born. A prophecy of the blood moon heirs. Twins born of a king and a rogue, bearing the golden hazel gaze, would possess the power to command any wolf, regardless of rank or bloodline. She saw the tension in his shoulders spike. They would be weapons, Conrad. My alpha didn't want granddaughters. He wanted a leash for every pack in the hemisphere. He would have raised them in a cage, used their voices to tear the world apart. I didn't run from you because I stopped loving you. I ran because your crown made them targets. I had to make them invisible to keep them human. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of her confession. Conrad turned, his eyes glowing with a terrifying mixture of paternal fury and the realization that the war to keep them safe had only just begun. The storm continued to batter the stone walls, but inside the estate, a different kind of barrier was beginning to crumble. Conrad sat rigid in an armchair across from the hearth, his gaze fixed on the dying embers, his mind a storm of ancient prophecies and the betrayal that had nearly cost him his bloodline. He felt the shift in the room before he heard it, a soft, rhythmic patter of small feet against the rug. Ava had climbed down from the sofa, her blanket trailing behind her like a discarded cocoon. She didn't hesitate. While her mother watched with bated breath from the kitchen doorway, the small girl walked straight up to the man whose name made grown alphas tremble. She stopped inches from his knee, her iridescent hazel eyes, his eyes, searching his face with a terrifying innocent clarity. Conrad held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was a king of ice and iron, a man built for war and absolute command, yet he found himself paralyzed by a 3-foot-tall girl. Ava reached out, her tiny warm hand coming to rest on his scarred knuckle. "You're the shadow man," she whispered, her voice a soft bell in the quiet room. "The one who kept the wolves away." The iron shell around Conrad's heart didn't just crack, it shattered. Instincts he hadn't known he possessed surged to the surface. Not the predatory drive of the alpha, but the fierce, protective ache of a father. His large hand instinctively cupped her small face, his thumb brushing her cheek with a tenderness that felt foreign and vital. For the first time in 5 years, the Alpha King didn't feel like a weapon. He felt like a shield. The sanctuary of the stone estate was shattered by a sound that didn't belong to the storm. Beneath the rhythmic drumming of the rain and the howling gale, a low, guttural vibration rose from the tree line. The sound of predators moving in lockstep. Conrad went rigid, his hand instantly falling away from Ava's face as his eyes shifted to a predatory, luminescent hazel. The air in the room ionized, thick with the scent of wet fur and the metallic tang of an approaching kill. The rival pack enforcers had arrived. They had tracked the remains of the fire Simone had lit in her desperation, following the trail of ash and smoke through the mud and the dark. Now they were a ring of steel and teeth surrounding the estate, invisible in the deluge, but felt in the heavy murderous intent pressing against the glass. "Get them into the cellar, now," Conrad commanded, his voice no longer a father's, but a king's. He didn't wait for Simone to move. He was already crossing the room toward the heavy oak doors. Outside, the flash of lightning revealed a dozen silhouettes standing at the edge of the lawn. monstrous, hulking shapes with eyes like glowing coals. They weren't here for a diplomatic parley. They were here to claim the prophecy by force. Simone's breath hitched as she scooped the twins into her arms, the terror of the last 5 years finally catching up to her. The storm had masked their approach, but it wouldn't hide the coming blood. The Alpha King stood at the threshold, his muscles coiling, his beast ready to tear the night apart to keep the darkness from touching the 2 little girls who bore his gaze. The hunt had ended. The slaughter was about to begin. The heavy oak doors groaned as the first enforcer slammed against them, the sound echoing like a death knell through the stone hall. Conrad turned to Simone, his eyes no longer human, but a swirling vortex of predatory gold and hazel. There was no time for parting words. His body contorted, bones snapping and reforming, in a violent, fluid symphony of power. In a heartbeat, the man was gone, replaced by a massive wolf of midnight black, his fur like ink against the dim light, his presence filling the room with the crushing weight of an Alpha King's aura. With a ferocious snarl that shook the foundations of the estate, he burst through the doors and into the storm. Outside, the forest was a chaotic blur of silver fur and crimson blood. Conrad was a shadow among shadows, a blur of lethal precision as he tore into the enforcers who dared threaten his bloodline. But the threat wasn't only outside. A pane of glass shattered in the kitchen, and a scarred grey wolf lunged through the opening, its teeth bared for the twins huddled in the corner. Simone didn't scream. Something ancient and dormant within her, a strength born of 5 years of survival and the fierce love of a mother, snapped into place. As the beast leaped, she didn't recoil. She met it midair, her own latent power manifesting as a shimmering kinetic shockwave that sent the wolf crashing back into the stone hearth. Her eyes flickered with a sudden fierce amber light as she stood over Ava and Aria, a human shield with the soul of a lioness. Inside and out, the battle for the Thorne inheritance was being written in blood, and for the first time, the hunters realized they were the ones being hunted. The storm had broken, leaving behind a world that smelled of wet earth and absolute victory. As the black SUV rolled up the winding drive of the Thorne estate, the morning sun glinted off the limestone pillars of the main pack house, where hundreds had gathered in a silence that hummed with anticipation. Conrad stepped out first, no longer the solitary shadow in the woods, but a king reclaimed. He didn't just offer Simone his hand, he interlaced his fingers with hers, anchoring her to his side as they ascended the stone steps. The crowd gasped as the twins emerged, their small faces glowing in the light, their hazel eyes, the undeniable Thorne legacy, surveying the vast territory that now belonged to them. Standing at the threshold of his ancestral home, Conrad turned to the assembly, his voice a low commanding rumble that echoed across the valley. He leaned in, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin of Simone's neck in a public display of possession and reverence, marking her with the scent of pine and iron. "The hunt is over," Conrad declared, his arm wrapping around Simone's waist as Ava and Aria clung to their legs. "Behold your queen, and behold the future of the Thorne bloodline." The roar that went up from the pack was deafening, a tide of loyalty that washed away the 5 years of cold silence. Simone looked up at Conrad, seeing the thorny millionaire melt into the man who had guarded her in the dark. The fugitive had found her sanctuary, the Alpha had found his purpose, and the twins had found a throne. In the heart of the kingdom, the fire Simone had lit to survive the night had,